Welcome to the 3030 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ruiz, and we are doing something a little bit different today. Instead of having an interview, we're going to have a question and answer podcast. These questions have been asked to me a bunch of times, and I really want to just put this information out there for you guys so you don't have to look for them, or if you're new to the paleo diet, you don't have to research it, or maybe it's a different point of view, and it's going to let me talk directly to you. So if you have any questions in the future that you want to ask me, please submit them to my website, 3030 Strong, and then we can just establish more of a dialogue so I can connect directly to you. To help me with this new format, I have my friend Adam Sadowski. Adam, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Guillermo. How are you?
Just having fun, dude. Just excited about this podcast because we're gonna try to do something a little bit different. So, for anyone out there that doesn't know you, let's start in the 3030 way that we start our podcast. So, Adam, what's your hero story?
Yeah. So after high school, I always wanted to still be involved with sports. So I went to undergrad to study physical therapy. And while I was there, during one of my, I believe it's my winter break, I was coming home from the mall with my mom, and I ended up getting rear-ended at a red light, and that caused me to fracture a rib. And then around 2 weeks later, I was at the gym and noticed that my whole arm went completely purple. And at first I thought I just tore something, and it actually ended up being deep vein thrombosis in my right subclavian vein. So what that is essentially a blood clot in one of my veins in my upper half of the body. I'm close to my right arm. And that kind of set me down the gamut of the medical system, and went through 3 doctors before they actually found out that it was a DVT. So I had a clot in me for about a month and a half before someone figured out what it was. And then eventually down the road, just started getting more and more involved with my health. And then I discovered naturopathic medical school, and that's where I'm at right now. So currently I'm at the National University of Natural Medicine, where I am studying to get my degree in naturopathic medicine, as well as getting a master's in research.
It's that's so cool how all of these different paths usually converge, and somehow, because you didn't start your journey by following the Rob Wolfs or the Chris Kressers. You found naturopathic medicine through a different way.
Yeah, just with that time that I had kind of to myself when I had that blood clot, it kind of wasn't, I wouldn't say I had depression, but there was definitely something around that. I just was not feeling my upbeat self, and just started, for whatever reason, really getting into nutrition and diet and lifestyle. Just found that I fell in love with it, and I really wanted to find a way I could make a career out of it, and don't know how, but somehow I guess I was just looking if there was a way that you could be a doctor and kind of, prescribe a diet and lifestyle as your main therapies, and then that's how I discovered naturopathic medicine.
And we met through a mutual friend of ours, Chris Masterjohn.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was actually following Chris on Snapchat, and then I heard you on his podcast, and I was like, well, this is pretty cool. And I reached out to him. I asked him if I could get your contact, and here we are now.
Yeah. And it's cool because, along the way, I've had a lot of people help me, get a little bit of an online presence, and I really want to help pay it forward. So for anyone out there, if you're interested in this type of medicine, if you like research, seriously, follow Adam on his Facebook page. He's posting some cool stuff. So Adam, let's get this conversation started. How was your Thanksgiving?
Phenomenal. There was so much food. Ate it all. Probably ate enough to, not ever want for food again. And just got to see a ton of family again. So it was great.
I stayed in Arizona and I ended up like cooking dinner, and I had I brined the turkey and then I made some gluten-free stuffing and some gluten-free macaroni and cheese. And you know what? This completely leads into the first question. So before we go any further on that, can you read the first question for us?
Yeah, so some people want to know essentially how to start, I guess, a paleo style type of diet, or for those who are, if they're already on it for a while, how to deal with it when they're at these sort of family occasions where you're probably going to go off the rails.
That's a question that I get a lot, and it always circles back to the idea of what is paleo, and it can get really granular. And like back when I started, when there were very few books out. There was basically the Paleo Solution by Rob Wolf, and the Paleo Diet by Lauren Cordain, and they had a couple of disagreements and some different stances. For example, Lauren Cordain advocated for a low saturated fat type of diet where you were eating like really lean meat. So it was a more a leaner type of paleo diet. And then the Rob Wolf book, you shone nightshades, and it was a more like a low carb paleo. And as time went by, we started to learn more, and we started to have more information come out and more studies. And then we started looking at how different people approach this diet. And that's when it got really interesting, because we started seeing people that were very successful on a higher carbohydrate diet. The inclusion of some things such as milk or rice or potatoes, we were seeing that these people were super successful in maintaining a lean body mass and crushing it on their workouts, and things started to shift. And some people kind of got upset because they were like, okay, so I thought that a paleo diet was a low carb diet. Or I thought that tomatoes were not allowed because they're nightshades and neither are peppers or eggplants. Or what about beans? It got really muddy and confusing. The way I like to define the diet that I follow is that it's the diet that is the least inflammatory for you. What do I mean by that? For example, if you have a person that is able to process lactose, meaning they have a Nordic or more European background, they are able to process lactose because in those areas of the world, their ancestors didn't have complete access to carbohydrates throughout the year. Now, my ancestral background is I'm Mexican, and in my part of the world, we basically had carbohydrates throughout the year. So because of this, I didn't have the need to have the enzyme to process lactase. And it's a funny story with lactase, because lactase is it's coded in a gene, and it's easier to break that than to create a new gene in order to express lactase. What does this mean? It means that the process of losing the ability to process lactose is advantageous, because once the kid is unable to process lactose in the form of milk, then he needs to wean from mom, and mom has the ability to have more offspring and then continue nurturing the kids, because there is carbohydrates available throughout the year in the form of fruits, tubers, and all of these different food sources. On the other hand, for people of European background, since they don't have access to carbohydrates during the winter, they develop the ability to maintain the lactase gene through their life. And they were able to utilize this form of food. So what I'm trying to get at is this. If you have the ability to process lactose, there's really no reason for you to shun it unless you are allergic to other aspects of milk products. For example, casein or albumin in the milk. So let's simplify this a little bit. If you have the ability to use lactose, you should not shun it because it's a good source of calories. It's a nutrient-dense food source, and it's going to help you, just simplify things. If you are unable to process lactose, lactose is a sugar, and your body needs to break it down. And if you don't break it down, the bacteria in your intestines are going to break it down, and that's what gives you gas, and it gives you bloating, and it can have some ill effect on your colon. Now, if we apply this principle, is this food inflammatory or not inflammatory for you? If we apply this principle to any food decision that we make, then we would be able to have an easier time adopting a healthy lifestyle. One of the biggest problems that I see is that during this first introduction to a healthy lifestyle, in whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it paleo or ancestral lifestyle or whatever you want to call it, is that at first we're super excited to be eating healthy and we don't know much. Then you start learning more, and you start getting really happy with your results, and you start missing like this stuff that you used to eat and now you're avoiding, and then you kind of like paleofy or make paleo foods. And I was just talking about this a second ago. Like for Thanksgiving, I made gluten-free mac and cheese. I don't even want to call it like paleo mac and cheese because there is nothing paleo about macaroni and cheese. I was using, really, really high quality cheese, and I went to Whole Foods and I bought like the fanciest, less inflammatory pasta, which happened to be like a rice, amaranth, and quinoa pasta. And then I used like heavy cream and some really nice spices and some mustard seed, and it was delicious. But I ended up making like no lie, it was like 12 ounces of mac and cheese for Thanksgiving. It was like the tiniest serving of mac and cheese. You know why? Because if I had made 2 pounds of mac and cheese, I would have eaten 2 pounds of mac and cheese.
Right. Yeah, I actually sat the mac and cheese spread that my aunt made, and it was killer, dude. And I could not stop eating it.
And it becomes a problem, because it's like the more you learn, the more dangerous you become, and then you start like looking at blogs, and then you start actually getting into this habit of making super palatable, super processed foods. And then, all the progress that you had made starts shifting, and then the scale starts going in the wrong direction.
Right. So you just end up westernizing whatever, I guess, diet template you're trying to focus on. You go kind of, from oh my God, I can't eat anything except for all this fresh produce and, meat, dairy, fish and whatnot, to then, you learn how to kind of find these alternate recipes to essentially create, you think you're making a quote unquote paleo brownie or a vegan brownie or what have you. And at the end of the day, it's still a brownie, really dense in calories and so easy to overeat on.
And I can make the argument that it's probably more dense in calories because something that you get out of a box, it's probably going to be like fat-free milk and really processed, and it's going to be less calorie dense than something that you make at home. Which goes into the second part of the question: what do you do for snacks? And do you have any favorite snacks, Adam?
I'll be honest, I don't really snack that much. If I do, it's a piece of fruit or a handful of nuts here and there, but I don't go out of my way to make like a healthified Snickers bar or anything of that sort.
Sometimes it's frustrating for me because I don't snack and I never have snack. I've been always a type of guy that, sits down and eats like a humongous meal, and that carries me over until my next meal. Before I started investigating diet and the thought of eating like multiple times very small meals permeated me, and I could just never adhere to that. I've never been able to snack, so I have very little sympathy for people that ask me that question, and I'm like, just don't snack. Just wait until your next meal, or eat a bigger meal. But that's another source of calories. And I know it might be frustrating, but in the end, calories do matter, and everything matters. Food quality, how inflammatory that food source is for you, and then calories.
Think about why is it that you're snacking in the first place? Are you snacking because you're stressed out? Are you snacking because you're bored? Are you snacking because you really just didn't eat much, earlier in the day or whatnot, and this is just kind of to hold you over to the next meal? Or you're super busy and you can only have a snack right now, and you're not going to be eating again for a little while, and you're going to have a big dinner later on. So I think one, context is key. But if you're eating a snack just because we're kind of used to this sort of society, I breakfast, lunch, and I have snack, and then I have a dinner, just because kind of like that's what's ingrained in us, then, I think that's kind of like you can refute that concept and say, okay, maybe a snack isn't necessary.
And of course, there are places where snacks are necessary. For example, if you did a really tough workout and you don't have access to the protein shake. Let's say you have an allergy to whey or casein or the albumin in whey protein. You know what I used to do back in the day when I first started, and I used to do a big workout and I didn't have anything to eat. I would always have baby food.
Like the squeezables?
No, not even squeezables. Like a jar of baby food, and I'm going to tell you why.
Oh, like the Gerber baby?
Yeah. So I used to keep them around because they are stored in glass, so it was there's no plastic or anything. You can find organic versions of them, and you can always find like a sweet potato or like a like a banana, and it's just a puree. They're about 80 calories, so it's not a lot of there are not a lot of calories in there. It's prepackaged in a single serving, and they're pretty damn inexpensive. So it was very easy for me to just pop open one of those cans, get those 80 calories, just to prevent my sugar to drop. That's before I found intermittent fasting, and I found all of those, all those tricks that prevent you from going hypoglycemic.
Say another thing to think about is for any of your, regular listeners of the show, your interview with Dr. Mike T. Nelson, last episode, where he was talking about the metabolic flexibility. Can you essentially perform while in a fasted state, or can you also perform while eating 2 Pop-Tarts?
Totally, and that's so important because humans are very resilient, and we've survived eating nothing but shoe leather. We're very, very resilient, and because of that resiliency, we are able to adapt and survive in many different environments. Now, survival is not the same as thriving, and we can survive eating nothing but Twinkies and Ho-Hos, or we can thrive by eating the most appropriate diet for you. And it goes, back to what is the most appropriate diet for you. Now, if you must snack, if you have to snack, beef jerky is pretty convenient. I usually use it when I go hiking. I'll take a couple of Epic bars or a bag of jerky, nuts and seeds, like you were saying. If you're using nuts, make sure they are in the shell, because if they're not in the shell, it's just so much easier to just pop one after the other because they're pretty tasty.
Yeah, dude. It's really easy to just
sit down and eat a whole bag or a whole can. And I also try to avoid, and a lot of people are going to be sad about this, I try to avoid nut butters, because that's super concentrated calories. That is, it's just a processed food that you will overeat.
Yeah, the single serving is the jar.
Yeah, exactly. The single serving is the jar. Especially if you end up at Costco and you can't find one of those 8-ounce jars, and you end up with a 16-ounce jar. How easy it is to just kill one of those. I used to do something with coconut shavings. I used to grab a bag of coconut shreds, and then you put a tablespoon of coconut oil a little bit of salt, and a tiny bit of vanilla extract, and you put it on your blender and you make it into a coconut butter, that shit is delicious. But you're talking about 1,200 calories that you can just sit there and without thinking about it, just eat. It goes back to principles. One of the first things you should do when you adopt this diet is clean your house of anything that is trash. Just throw away your processed cereals, throw away your candy, throw away all the simple sugars.
I would put up an argument against doing that because I think it depends kind of on your personality. If you're someone like me, where if the ice cream's in the freezer, you're going to eat the entire pint or the entire gallon in one sitting. So for me personally, I try not to bring it in as much as possible. But at the same time, I think that people shouldn't become overly restrictive, because when they do get that chance to indulge, like say at Thanksgiving or something, and then you just go, complete batshit crazy and you eat all of it in one sitting and then you feel really bad. I think it would be better for some people to, if it is in a hobby, cognizant of it, and if they are going to have it, be rational and have one or two pieces and not the entire bag of candy, every day. Don't go out and buy, a pack of Starburst and eat it all in one sitting just because you have it. If you want a treat here and there, yeah, go for it.
And that's that's where you have everything under control. Because if you have a monster sweet tooth, having that temptation in your pantry is going to win.
Right.
For example, one of the funny things about when I first started the paleo diet is it was like this very random rule that white potatoes were not allowed. Okay. But sweet potatoes were. It was just so random, and if you look at Matt Lalonde's presentation on the Ancestral Health Symposium 2013, I believe, he makes a very good argument about how nutritiously dense white potatoes are. And one of the few things that sweet potatoes beat, white potatoes over is the content of beta carotene, which makes the potatoes orange. But with this very random rule, you were completely limiting yourself from eating white potatoes. And when you go to a restaurant back in 2010, 2011, not many restaurants had sweet potatoes on the menu. Not many restaurants had sweet potato fries or sweet potato tots or, all of these different variants of this very nutritionally dense food. So by having this random rule, you were actually self-selecting to limit a source of calories. So if you went out and they had a burger and they didn't have sweet potatoes, well, white potatoes are not paleo, so you wouldn't eat the fries. And then people got smart and savvy, and then they started saying, well, a lot of people are eating potatoes. Let's give them an option. And by giving that option, then you're back to square one. Sure, sweet potatoes are super healthy, but if you fry them and if you coat them in truffle oil or if you put cinnamon and, it becomes a very palatable food. That's where you have to be judicious and know, your triggers. If you have a monster sweet tooth, maybe don't keep the ice cream in the freezer. If you have very good self-control, well, then you have a little bit more latitude. Which brings me to another point, and that's, what are your goals? If your goals are to look better on a swimsuit, if your goals are to just PR, then you have a little bit more latitude on your choices, because it's just you against yourself trying to reach a goal. But if your goals are health, in the most extreme cases, just think about, you have a member of your family that suffers from something like MS or autism or maybe cancer. That's when this latitude goes kind of away and you have to stick to the plan. There is no cheating. There is no just this once, because your life depends on it. And it's not fair because you'll see people that are pretty damn healthy that are following some sort of ancestral framework, and then every once in a while they can kick their heels up and go eat pizza and beer. But in a case of someone that has like something like MS, that pizza and beer could set you back months.
For some people, again, this totally goes back to what you're saying. It depends on your case. For some people, just saying, just this once, yeah, sure, maybe you only have some residual effects for the next couple of days, or just the day after, or even just that night. But I think what's more important is how often does that just this once sort of become almost a daily thing where you kind of just go off the wagon.
And this applies to all aspects of your life. For example, if you have trouble with sleep, if you have trouble, if you have an addictive personality, or if you have, if you want to improve yourself financially, just put it in that same perspective. Let's say you have addiction. Is just this once going to derail you and you're going to fall off the wagon and it's going to ruin all the progress that you've had? Or let's think about financially, maybe you've worked your ass off throughout the year, and just because it's Christmas, you're not going to go open a new credit card, because that could derail all of the progress you've achieved throughout the year. I think we beat that horse to the ground, man. So what's the next question?
Something that seems to come up a lot with nutrition questions is, what supplements do you guys like to take?
So that's another one that my attitude towards supplementation has changed a lot from when I started into now. Like I mentioned it on Chris Masterjohn's podcast, that I was learning about like omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, and I used to go and order like if I wanted fries, I would just eat the fries, and then at the end of the day, I would say, well, I had fries, I had a ton of polyunsaturated fatty acids, so I'm just going to eat extra omega-3 fatty acid tonight to balance the intake of omega-6. It does not work like that, people. Omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids, are very fragile, and they oxidize readily. So what I was doing is I was trying to, when you eat a bolus of omega-6 fatty acids, you end up oxidizing a bunch of them. And by me trying to balance those omega-6s with omega-3s, I ended up making more oxidative damage. Now I know that it's not what's happening at the moment. It's the long-term repercussions of what you've eaten. I've heard estimates that it takes around 4 years to completely balance your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio.
Yeah, start chugging that Carlson's brand, man.
And in those 4 years, one of the biggest sources for vitamin E in our diet is actually polyunsaturated fatty acids. And because you're trying to turn over this polyunsaturated fatty acids, you do have a higher need of vitamin E. So vitamin E, while doing this conversion, is super important so you don't just completely become a fire inside of yourself. What I want to say is this. I used to supplement a lot earlier when I started this health journey. I used to take selenium. I used to take iodine. I used to take the omega-3 fatty acids in the form of like a Costco brand fish oil. I used to take magnesium, which I still take. I used to take BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, and I used to take all sorts of adaptogens. And as I was learning through school, and the concept started permeating into my head that there are no shortcuts. And we basically need to micromanage our nutrition status with a balanced diet for a couple of reasons. when you take something that is exogenous or in a purified, it might not have the same effect that we desire. And this has been shown over and over and over with supplements like vitamin D. Now, if your vitamin D is less than 20 nanograms per deciliter, then maybe you do need to supplement a little bit in order to get it within a good functional range. But having higher levels does not mean better outcomes. And most importantly, when you convert UV light to vitamin D, there's a whole bunch of side reactions that happen that end up creating a lot of cool things in your body. And when you supplement vitamin D, you're missing out on those side reactions. And those side reactions haven't even been studied. So we don't even know the consequences of long-term supplementation. So don't just treat the results on a paper. You shouldn't be just treating the lab results on a paper. You should actually be trying to obtain most of these supplemental things through diet, through good exposure to sunlight, through exercise. And then you're going to start seeing things click. For example, the reason I used to take branch chain of amino acids was because I thought that my body was just going to eat itself away if I worked out, fasted, and I didn't have something to eat like immediately after. And it turns out that the body is not just like an on-off switch. It takes a little bit longer than that in order before you start cannibalizing your own muscle. And it's funny that sometimes we think we are smarter than the evolutionary adaptations that we've suffered through over thousands and thousands of years. Same thing with like things like iodine. The number one source for iodine in the American diet is iodized salt, which is not the best thing for someone that has thyroid problems. And when you stop eating a processed diet, one of the first things that falls is your sodium intake, which carries the iodine. And then we start doing crazy things like never eating iodized salt, and we start incorporating like pink Himalayan salt or all these fancy salts that lack iodine. But eating a bolus of iodine is not good for you either. So eating things like seaweed snacks, like dulce, and things that contain iodine naturally bound within fiber and proteins and all different amino acids, and that you're going to be able to absorb without having that bolus hitting you, is going to be more beneficial and less cumbersome than having a shelf full of supplements. Do you take any supplements, Adam?
Yeah, so right now I am taking a few supplements. I take a probiotic. I take vitamin D, but I don't take too much vitamin D because I do eat a lot of fatty fish, and fish do actually contain vitamin D, interestingly. And I also take, or I was taking, currently I'm not taking it anymore, actually, was some melatonin, and that is it. So I'm not a big supplement guy. For me, it's more of what are you deficient in and why, and does it even need to be supplemented in the first place? For some people to supplement, it's more of like an N=1 type of situation where you can see if it might help you out from a sports performance perspective, or if it might help you out from maybe a cognitive perspective. And of course, there's always a placebo that's probably associated with all that. But I think for certain situations, there are some supplements that are indicated, and it all depends on the person.
Speaking of like cognitive performance, do you ever try any nootropics?
I have not fooled around with any nootropics. No.
No. Well, at school, I tried like paracetam and caffeine is a nootropic, and nicotine is a nootropic, and I really didn't, like the paracetams. Maybe I'm not a responder, but I never really found any cognitive effects or nothing that was long lasting. And it goes back to your idea of n equals one. As long as it is not like overly dangerous, you can try it out. You can see what happens, but you'll find out pretty fast that sticking to the basics, good sleep, good nutritionally dense diet, and good exercise are going to be your best supplements.
Your diet, your sleep habits, and your exercise, those are your three main pillars probably for everything. So if those are off, you got to address those first before, packing the supplements and spending thousands of dollars for some people who just think that supplements are the best thing in the world. You have to understand why you're taking these supplements in the first place. So for me, I live in the Pacific Northwest because that's where my school is, and it's currently the middle of winter where it's cloudy and rainy every day. So taking in, 1,000 or 2,000 international units of vitamin D for me would be beneficial. As we've been saying, humans are not fragile. People have been around before vitamin D supplementation was around, so they were outside all the time absorbing vitamin D. And then when it came time for winter months, they didn't, have that worry. And I'm also in medical school. Sleep is out the window, so taking a little bit of melatonin for me personally helps me just to at least, once I fall asleep, just stay asleep.
For me, like the supplements that I take and that I've been taking most consistently have been basically just magnesium and cod liver oil. That's about it. Every once in a while, I have a organically fair trade. No orangutan was harmed in the creation of this palm oil, and I do take some palm oil, like a tablespoon, and I just like put it in my mouth and chug it in.
And what's the purpose for that? Is that vitamin A or?
Yeah, for vitamin A and a little bit of vitamin E, and that to help buffer some of the oxidative stress from polyunsaturated fatty acids that we are exposed to because I eat out every once in a while. And then the cod liver oil, I like it because it has a good balance of ADE, and it's more of a food than a supplement. It has been used for thousands of years. Ever since Paleo Effects, I've been using the Rosita brand cod liver oil, and I just whenever I remember, I pop a pill. I'm not super consistent with it. Now, magnesium, I do pretty consistently because it's one of the hardest minerals to get from diet. It really helps me relax. I really like natural calm, which you mix with hot water, which I don't think Dr. Grace Lou likes. But I like it, and I mix with warm water. I sip it at night, and it kind of like tells me it's time to go to bed. It's magnesium citrate, which is not.
So it's like a ritual type of thing.
It's more like a ritual type of thing. It's probably pure placebo, but it keeps me regular. It tastes pretty damn good. It's very inexpensive. Do you ever track your micronutrients?
Like with Chronometer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like anal about it. I've used it before just to see, if I've been able to hit everything in a single day, and I've done that for, over the course of a week, and yeah, I can hit, full nutrient status just through food alone without any sort of supplementation. So, which brings me actually to a question as to why are you not eating liver as opposed to taking the palm oil and the cod liver oil? Why not just eat the liver?
Yeah, I do eat liver. I do have grass-fed liver in my freezer. And another question that people ask me is, how do you prepare your liver so it doesn't taste like shit? And the way I do it is I soak it overnight with milk, and then I cut it, and then I fry it in a little bit of avocado oil, and then I put curry powder on it.
Yeah, I just throw mine in the oven without any sort of seasoning.
Really? Well, and that's another thing that I found is that once you figure out something is good for you, once you figure out that something is beneficial and is going to bring you health, you kind of like get used to the flavor and just changing that frame of mind that this food is healthy for you, you start appreciating the food for the value that it's giving you, and you kind of like get used to it. I've heard of people freezing the liver, or chopping it off into tiny little squares and then freezing it and then just taking it as a pill. That's another option. Um, but whatever way that you can get this nutrient dense foods into your body, using things like spices as supplements, like using curry powder and using turmeric every time you cook, instead of using refined oils, you start using like avocado oil and olive oil and coconut oil. You could think of those things as supplements for your life and for your health. So there's many ways of getting all the nutrients that you need. And I was asking you about Chronometer because if you have ever any doubt of what your nutrition status is, just downloading the app and just quantifying things for a couple of months and seeing, with your normal diet, what nutrients are you missing? That would be a better way of assessing what supplements you should be taking.
I wouldn't even with the supplements. I would just see if you could first fit it in with food,
Totally.
and then from there, say you have like that nutrient is addressed through nuts, but you have a nut allergy. Then perhaps maybe trying to use a supplement might be better than looking for a food source.
Yeah, maybe your selenium is just super low, and eating, going to Sprouts or Whole Foods and buying some Brazil nuts and eating a couple of Brazil nuts once a week and to satisfy the selenium status, that is so much better than buying those selenium pills. And if you're not tech savvy, or you don't want to mess around with like logging all your food or whatever, following a plan that, like for example, the Wells protocol that Terry Wells created. She was afflicted with MS, and she has been able to slowly reverse her condition. And it's very cool and very it's just super smart the way that she designed her food plan. Basically, you take 2 cups of different vegetables, and she has lists of which vegetables to use, and some like the onion family, and then some cabbage, and then just colorful vegetables. And then she has predetermined amounts of like how many ounces of meat you need per week, and she has made all of these calculations that by following that recipe, you will satisfy your nutrition status. So that's another strategy if you don't want to just go ahead and log in everything you eat. Another excellent resource to try to estimate your nutrition status is Paul Jaminet's book, The Perfect Health Diet. And he lays down the nutritional content of foods, and then he does have recommendations for supplements, and it's a very short list. And the coolest thing about that is that he breaks down the supplement list for like things that you should probably be getting daily, and then things that you might only need just once a week, and that's also very convenient. For things like adaptogens, I often take holy basil. I really like holy basil as an adaptogen. And I did write an ebook on the supplements to use in case you have a cold, or if you have like nausea, or if you get food poisoning. So we can actually use supplements, herbs, tinctures as medicine instead of reaching for like the medicine cabinet. You can just if you're nauseous, making some ginger tea. If you ate something that was not agreeing with you, taking some charcoal in order to bind those toxins, and then taking some like peppermint oil in order to placate some of the overactivity of your gut biome. Those are also cool ways of using supplementation. But all in all, my supplement list is super short, and the more I learn, the more I've advanced my medical career, that supplement list keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay, so what's question 3?
What is Hashimoto's thyroiditis? Can it be reversed? And what is desiccated thyroid?
That's a question that I've been hearing more and more often, and I usually hear it or I see it on Facebook posts. It's super interesting. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is a set of symptoms that present with hypothyroidism, and it in a very basic 101 level is your body attacking your own thyroid, and your thyroid not producing enough T3 and T4 for you to have a proper functioning system. And how is it diagnosed? You basically do a thyroid panel, and thyroid panel is like a loaded phrase because different practitioners are going to have different forms of thyroid panels. In my practice, we check TSH, T3, T4, and thyroid antibodies. And by comparing, by checking those numbers, we are able to determine if you have hypothyroidism, and then if that hypothyroidism is indeed caused by your own body attacking your thyroid. And when your body attacks your thyroid, a couple of things happen. Your thyroid production dips, and then you start getting nodules on your thyroid, and that's when you start getting like a little bit of a goiter or nodular lymphoid tissue. Now, if you were to go to a allopathic or conventional doctor and they see low thyroid levels, more than likely they would prescribe you T4 and a synthetic form of T4. Back in the 80s, before the 80s, the way people treated hypothyroidism was with a thyroid replacement called Armor. And Armor is basically desiccated pork or porcine thyroid gland. And basically, what they were doing, they were getting this thyroid gland, they were desiccating it, they were just mashing it up, and then they would quantify it by checking how much iodine was within this powder. The problem with that is that there was no differentiation between the T3 and T4 content within that porcine desiccated powder. So they were making these pills, and they are usually quantified as 1 grain, quarter grain, or half a grain, all the way up to 3 grain of desiccated thyroid hormone. So what happened is that there wasn't a lot of customization or a lot of quality control because we didn't know how much T3 and T4 was in this pill. Now, T3 is the more active form of thyroid, and T4 is a less active form of thyroid that you can deiodize one of those iodine molecules, and it becomes T3, which becomes more active. So, because there wasn't a lot of quality control and the quantification wasn't there, people had a lot of trouble controlling their TSH. Before we go any further, I'm going to talk a little bit about TSH, and then we'll continue this conversation about Armor. TSH kind of works as a reverse signaling. TSH is a thyroid stimulating hormone that is produced in your pituitary that sends a signal to your thyroid in order to output thyroid hormone. So, if you have high TSH levels, that means that your brain is commanding your thyroid to produce more thyroid because you're low on thyroid hormone. If you have low TSH levels, that means that you have too much thyroid hormone and your brain doesn't need your thyroid to make more thyroid hormone. So a patient would show up to the doctor, they would have high TSH, meaning the output from the thyroid wasn't enough, and they would prescribe Armor, but because of this type of quality control where they just counting the number of iodine molecules, you could overshoot with one prescription, and then by keeping the same dosage, the next prescription would undershoot it, and you would have to like balance out from batch to batch. Around 1980, pharmaceutical companies started noticing that there needed to be better quantification of thyroid hormone, and that's when Synthroid or levothyroxine came to market, and it was completely 100% standardized to the T4 content. And they created a bunch of different formulations. I think there's up to 17 different dosages of T4, and in that way, you were able to better prescribe this thyroid replacement in order for that person to have steadier levels of thyroid. The problem with T4 and using T4 only is that what if your body is hypothyroid because it's not converting that T4 into T3? So if you're just giving T4, and if you have that problem, you'll never be stable. Another problem, and that's something that I just found out recently while I'm at medical school, is that there's people that react really poorly to the binders in the synthetic thyroid hormone. And this is a big problem because pharmacies are just usually looking for what is the most cost-effective manufacturing company that is making this T4 hormone. So they'll switch providers, maybe twice, 3 times per year, maybe more, maybe less. So then you have that person that has been steady on that T4 medication, but because the binders change, all of a sudden their thyroid is out of control, and that presents with another problem. Enter Nature-Troid. Nature-Troid went one step further, and instead of just doing quality control on the number of iodine molecules within that the desiccated porcine thyroid, they decided to go one step further and actually quantify for T3 and T4 content. So Nature-Troid is actually desiccated porcine thyroid that has been quality checked to have a steady number of T3 and T4. So there's not as many variations or dosages in Nature-Troid, and some people were also having reactions to some of the binders within Nature-Troid. And that's where WP came into the market more recently. And WP is what we use at my clinic. That's what we prescribe. And the only thing that WP has are some chicory root. It has medium chain triglycerides, T4 and T3. It has some T2 and thyroglobulin, and all of those things are pretty much hypoallergenic.
What's the point of the MCT in it?
Oh, they're binders. That's the binders. Yeah, so the binders never change. So it's a purer, more hypoallergenic form of thyroid. Now, there has been some things on the interwebs about how WP thyroid hormone has lactose, and it has a tiny microscopic amount of lactose that is used in the preservation of the porcine thyroid powder before it ever hits the WP factory. And in practice, I have patients that are lactose intolerant that it's such a minute amount of lactose that I haven't found any patients that are not able to tolerate it. Maybe in the future I'll find someone, but the reason we use WP is because A, it's standardized beyond Armour, whenever we prescribe WP, we know that the content of T3 and T4 is going to be exact from batch to batch. And then B, it has the most hypoallergenic binders, being MCT, medium chain triglycerides from coconut, and chicory root. And those are the only binders that it has. And that way we eliminate some of the problems that we see when we go with a synthetic, or when we use even a higher form of a desiccated thyroid product like Nature Thyroid. So in that way we are sure that from batch to batch, from month to month, from week to week, that dosage of thyroid is going to be consistent, and most importantly, that we're not adding a new binder or changing binders for a person that has a steady thyroid. So basically what we do is we check your TSH levels, we prescribe the thyroid medication that we seem that it's appropriate for that patient, and we can predict pretty well how you're going to react to the medication by looking at T3 and T4, making sure that the problem is in production, or maybe the problem might be in conversion, or maybe you have been hyperthyroid and you are like in a more like thyroid resistant state. So we're able to predict how much of that thyroid hormone you need, and because of the consistency and standardization and all of that, we know that you're going to be stable once we get you stable, and that's eliminating a bunch of variables that a lot of people have found. And I'm gonna tell you a very personal example. My mom was diagnosed with hyperthyroid when she was around 18 years old, and the doctor decided to do an ablation, and they overdid the ablation. She lost most of her thyroid, and for the past, I want to say, I'm not exaggerating when I say 40 to 50 years, my mom has been out of control with her thyroid, with periods of time where she was hyper, and periods of time where her hair was falling in chunks, and just completely uncontrolled. And I can trace this back because when we lived in Mexico, she was using a type of thyroid, and then we came to the States, and from month to month, we would go to different pharmacies and not have the same thyroid. It was up until I met Dr. Alan Christensen, and Dr. Alan Christensen, ran some tests and figured out my mom's dosage. We switched her to a WP thyroid. This is the first time in her adult life that she has been euthyroid, and it pisses me off because it's super personal and it's like firsthand. And then at the second time, it's like, whoa, the power of our medicine, because we're actually looking at the details and figuring out what's best for our patients. Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. Yeah.
What other medications would a patient who has hypothyroid come into contact with, aside from the Nature Thyroid and aside from the Armor? And then based off that question, is it common to see patients who have a history of hyperthyroid, and because of how serious of a condition that can actually be, and based off of the treatment from that, how common is it to see them go into now a hypothyroid state?
So so I have not dealt with too many Graves patients. Okay, so every time there's a Graves patient, Graves would be the opposite of Hashimoto's. Sometimes it could be an autoimmune disorder that instead of blocking the production of thyroid hormone, it actually makes your thyroid overproduce thyroid hormone. And it's funny because like the first stages of Graves' disease would be similar to a thyroid storm, where you're just overproducing thyroid, and now you have palpitations, your hair is falling off, you are trembling, you are easily excitable. It's just imagine being on copious amounts of caffeine to the max. Okay. And the people that are on hyperthyroid or Graves' disease, you would see their TSH below like 0.5. You will see them, sometimes as low as 0.01 or undetectable levels of TSH. And remember, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, that's a hormone that your brain produces in order to make the thyroid make more thyroid. So for people with Graves' disease, it's usually self-limiting, and I didn't know this. And if you treat it properly with things that block the production of thyroid hormone, for example, you can use lithium, and you can use fluoride, and you can use different. There's a couple of natural supplements that actually can help you block that production. And if you get through that stage, that self-limiting stage, you do end up in the end with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So after you pass that very dangerous point, then some of our patients actually end up having to take thyroid replacement. How insane is that? Most importantly, Graves' disease it's super dangerous. So some of our patients that cannot be controlled with natural supplements do have to go to medications. Tapazole, it would be one of the medications that is used in PTU, and unfortunately, those medications are not the best ones, especially for women that want to get pregnant. But we try to control that thyroid output because you don't want your patient to have a heart attack or to just have a thyroid storm. And then it turns around, and then they become hypothyroid. And once they become hypothyroid, it could be like a switch where those antibodies stop acting on the receptors that are producing the thyroid hormone, and now it starts attacking the actual thyroid, and the thyroid becomes atrophied, or not sure, but then we switch to the other approach, which is trying to help the with exogenous thyroid. It can be really scary, especially because some of the symptoms of advanced Graves' disease, and remember, Graves, that's hyperthyroid, could be fatigue, could be feeling chilly, palpitations, losing your hair, which mimic the symptoms of Hashimoto's thyroiditis or hypothyroidism. And what's happening is this: your thyroid is just dumping thyroid hormone into your body. Just think of it like an accelerator. That thyroid hormone is going into the nucleus of your cell, and it's inciting growth, or it's inciting the turnaround of cells. So it's just like pressing that pedal to the metal. Now, I'm pretty sure my listeners are familiar with insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is when you have too much glucose in your bloodstream, and then your cells are like, no more, I don't want to accept any more of this sugar into the cell. So then they become resistant to insulin, which insulin is what drives the sugar into the cell. Well, with Graves' disease, your body is so good at buffering the input of thyroid, because it's just so detrimental for that cell to just continually accept this thyroid hormone. So what happens is that your body tries to get rid of this thyroid hormone as much as possible by converting it into reverse T3, which is an inactive form of thyroid hormone, by pooping it out, by your liver, by your kidneys, just trying to get rid of this thyroid hormone as much as possible. So the first thing that goes down on a person with Graves' disease is your TSH. So you can see the gradual reduction of TSH from a normal level to a lower level of less than 0.5. Okay, but T3 and T4 are going to remain steady because the body is just buffering it out. On the later stages of Graves' disease, that's when you start seeing a climb in T3 and T4 levels. And when you have a person that has low TSH and high levels of T3 and T4, that's when you're like, oh crap, we need to dig deeper, because not only are we worried about the output of your thyroid, but we also have to look into cardiac health. We have to look into osteoporosis. We have to look into, maybe an echocardiogram, and maybe, because that means that that person has been hyperthyroid for a very long time. So that's the type of person that we would, make sure that they're super well controlled, and that's when we would escalate things and maybe use a pharmaceutical or try to get them out of that hyperthyroid state, because that is like danger zone.
So now, can this Hashimoto's thyroiditis, can this be reversed?
Okay, so remember when we were talking about supplementation and how we should be getting all of our supplements from food, but there's certain cases where like supplementing with a little bit of D3 might be beneficial. It's almost the same with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's almost the same with things like type 1 diabetes. There are cases of people with type 1 diabetes that are able to control their type 1 diabetes with only food. And it's by being super strict, with their, not only their carbohydrate intake, but their protein intake and their energy expenditure. Same thing with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It is an autoimmune disease. And just like we take care of trying to eliminate the, like when we're talking about like why we use WP, because it's the most hypoallergenic, we try to remove all of the allergens, all of the things that might be causing that autoimmune reaction. For example, is there intestinal permeability? Is there an HPA axis dysfunction? Is there a gut disbalance? Is there SIBO? Is there mold or a mold infection, EBV, metal toxicity? So we try to eliminate all of those things that can cause that autoimmune reaction. And then we focus on food, because that's probably the number one thing that is going to create those autoantibodies, if you have a food allergy. So most of my patients, as a baseline, we eliminate wheat, we eliminate dairy, and we eliminate eggs, in order for us to take away the most allergenic things that people eat. Okay. And then we stabilize them, and then sometimes we are lucky enough that we can go low in the dose. But what happens when that person says to me, you know what, I want to go off of all medications, I don't want to take any more thyroid hormone? Well, think of it as a supplement. That you are taking a medication shouldn't be like a mark against you. You shouldn't be ashamed that for some reason we live in a very inflammatory environment, and the cards weren't on your favor, and now you have to take this extra little tab. Why are you so hard on yourself that you think that you are like less than healthy because you have to supplement with this thyroid medication? It is possible, but your life will have to be perfect. And that means that you're going to have to be super clean with your diet, no latitude. You're going to have to be super responsible with your sleep. Again, no latitude. And then you're going to have to maybe move to a place that doesn't have pollution. Maybe you won't be able to drink tap water. Maybe going into a pool and the chlorine is going to make you go out of whack. So having that thyroid medication gives you so much latitude and gives you so much normalcy in your life that I really think that if you're well controlled, if your TSH levels are fine, if you feel great, if you found a way to live a life where you are eating the less inflammatory food for you, I don't think there's any shame in taking that extra pill. It's just going to facilitate your life. Now, if you want to try it, we can try it, but I'm going to tell you, it's not going to be easy. So, yeah, I guess, we bored our listeners long enough, man. It's been, I think we have an hour and a half worth of footage.
That's awesome. That was fun.
That was fun. And again, if you guys have any questions, send them to us. You can send them to my website. That's Guillermo at 3030strong.com. And make sure you follow Adam. Adam, any plans for next quarter when you start at school? What classes are you going to be taking next quarter?
Next quarter, I am taking ears, nose, and throat. So the way our curriculum is built is we are in a block system. 12 weeks straight, we learn nothing except for everything associated to that respected body function. So right now, I'm in a neurology block. For the past 12 weeks, everything has been strictly energy focused, diagnosing diseases, treatments, lab work, everything like that. And next term, I'm taking ears, nose, throat, and hematology, oncology, as well as several research classes. I'm also trying to conduct a systematic review, and I'm also part of another study where right now I'm just kind of my role is more in data collection.
That's awesome. I'm gonna put you on the spot, and you're gonna have to create a blog or something, dude, so you can keep the listeners updated. Because it's gonna be really cool to, as we do these different episodes, just to see your progress, and then when you graduate, you'll have people lining up outside of your door for you to be the doctor.
Totally, man. That'd be awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Adam, and I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, have a good one, Gabriel. See you later.